The assurance that I thought we were getting from the government on the weekend was that they had dropped the racial vilification aspect of this legislation, and all they were seeking to do was get additional powers to ban so-called hate groups and to deport hate preachers. It seems to me that perhaps it does quite a bit more than that, and let's see where debate goes in the Senate, because it's possible that the coalition might decide that what they voted for in the House of Reps is a lot more than what they thought they were voting for.
The Australian way of life is under threat like never before. Sectarian violence is rife on our streets. The political class is silencing mainstream Australians under the guise of hate speech. And the media, universities and major civic organisations continue to fan the flames of division. Australia is without leadership and Australians are losing hope. 2026 will be the year that defines the future of our great nation. Are we up to the task? Hello Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers. Welcome to 2026. Great to be back. Today we'll be discussing the so-called anti-hate speech laws, the calls and the undertaking of a royal commission into the Bondi Massacre, and Trump's bid to take over Greenland. Tony, great to be back with you. Happy New Year to you, and looking forward to another year of your analysis and insights on our political situation.
And Dan, I think we might also talk about some of these most recent opinion polls as well.
Indeed.
Because, as you were saying on the Credland show just a while back, this is quite seismic to see that for the first time in opinion polling history, One Nation is now apparently in front of the coalition.
Yeah.
In terms of primary votes.
Indeed, yeah, that's an important thing we'll get to. So I'd love to start with the hate speech laws. So as we talk now, it's the case that the laws have gone through the lower house with the support of the Liberal Party. The National Party abstained. Now we'll see what happens in the Senate when it goes there, whether there's any amendments. But these are shockingly abysmal laws, bad laws that will not deal with the problem basically at all. They're claimed to have, to deal with another Bondi type situation. Now, what are we talking about? We're specifically talking about the capacity of the government to designate so-called hate groups and to be able to disband those groups on the basis of very subjective terminology, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one part of the terminology is that a group can be disbanded to protect the Australian community against so-called social, economic, psychological and physical harm.
Maybe the IPA could be banned.
Well, that's exactly what we said in our press release. The IPA could be banned.
The Liberal Party could be banned.
It could be.
Particularly if it's promoting climate denialism, for instance.
Well, the left have spent years calling the Liberal Party nasty racists. I mean, the left have no limiting principle when it comes to this, and those Liberals that have gone along with this in good faith that it's going to be used in a way that it is said are incredibly naive if they don't believe it's coming to them. So this is a very, very bad day for our democracy and our country. What's your assessment?
Well, I would like to see a serious legal analysis of the bill that has gone through one House of Parliament. I've read news reports over the course of the day. I've seen some social media posts over the course of the day. The assurance that I thought we were getting from the government on the weekend was that they had dropped the racial vilification aspect of this legislation, and all they were seeking to do was get additional powers to ban so-called hate groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir and to deport hate preachers or to punish hate preachers. It seems to me, based on some of the posts I've seen that purport to be citing elements of the bill, that perhaps it does quite a bit more than that. And let's see where debate goes in the Senate, because it's possible that the coalition might decide that what they voted for in the House of Reps is a lot more than what they thought they were voting for. But to get back to the general point, what problem is the government trying to solve here? Now, if the problem is that these Islamist preachers have been calling for the killing of Jews and celebrating the death of Jews, sometimes citing scripture, surely the way forward would have been a very simple bill that says it is a crime to call for the death of someone based on religion, even if you are citing scripture to that purpose. And I reckon that would have been a half a page piece of legislation. If the problem is mobs outside the Opera House or walking across the Sydney Harbour Bridge saying death, death to the IDF, or globalise the Intifada, I think you would pass a very simple bit of legislation saying that it is a crime to use slogans such as death, death to the IDF and globalise the Intifada, which are clearly intimidatory and which could clearly be considered an incitement to violence. And if you wanted to do more than that, and frankly, I probably would, although this might be something that had to be done by state rather than federal law, you might give the police commissioner a power to ban marches or demonstrations where it's likely that phrases inciting violence, and you'd cite the actual phrases, could be used. Now, I reckon that good law is law that specifically and clearly deals with the problem in hand, that doesn't set up a whole new category of potential jurisprudence, which will, in many cases, invite judges to go off on all sorts of tangents that were never intended or were never explicitly contemplated by the legislature. And law which is being made on the run or revised on the run that hasn't been subjected to the sort of scrutiny which complex and criminal laws with heavy sanctions should be, I think is usually bad law. So my general point, Dan, is that I am very sceptical whether any of the laws that are passed today are actually going to stop the specific instances of Jew hatred that we have seen time and time again over the last 2 years. And I am very fearful that the laws that are passed today might end up being used by activist groups to target a whole lot of individuals and entities which were never intended and which certainly have never been guilty of promoting the kind of Jew hatred that we've seen. So I'm deeply sceptical, and I think this could be yet another milestone in our moral and legislative decline.
You say never intended, but I'm much more cynical than you. I think it is intended to capture other groups. And the other thing here is Jewish groups can also be disbanded under these laws. And I just get so frustrated at the naivety of some organisations that support this without any awareness that this government is not your friend and they will use it against you if they have the opportunity to do so. The other thing that hasn't been thought about here is I believe now that there is a strong incentive for extremist groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir to set up as a political organisation in order to circumvent these laws, because they would be notionally at least protected under the freedom of political communication, because of course Menzies tried to ban the Communist Party of Australia. The High Court knocked that back. Now, that was then, this is now, but there is very strong case law around you can't disband a political entity. So this is going to incentivise the creation of extremist political parties that you cannot get rid of. And I don't think anybody in Parliament is aware that they have just unleashed this on the Australian public.
Well, again, Dan, I would want to see a very sober and considered legal analysis. But I think you're quite right to be very concerned about legislation that has been revised on the run and passed in haste, particularly given that at no stage has the government told us exactly what kind of hate speech and exactly which hate preachers will end up being targeted by this legislation. I am told by one of my former coalition colleagues that he asked the Attorney General's Department briefers what precisely would be covered by this, and the Attorney General's Department briefers said that'd be up to the judges. Well, we know what judges can get up to. Activist judges, in the face of actions brought by activist lawyers, can often come up with some pretty far-fetched things. And yes, I really do worry that there could be a whole lot of unintended consequences flowing from this. and what is done in haste is often repented in leisure. What we've seen from a government is a government which has basically been entirely complacent against the rise of Jew hatred, has completely ignored the warnings that it's had from such normally pretty calm and responsible agencies as ASIO about the growing threat of Islamist terror. They were oblivious to this. It's almost like they just thought it couldn't happen here. It has happened here. And honestly, I think what the government has been desperate to do ever since December the 14th is say we've solved the problem. But honestly, I don't think they've gone anywhere near solving the problem.
Well, just under the politics, why did the Liberal Party give the government an out? I mean, this is just baffling to me when Susan Lee was saying you've got to go back to Canberra. No, this is just cosplay political kabuki theatre designed to try and save Anthony Albanese. Wouldn't Susan Lee have been better off going to Bondi and giving a speech and being honest with Australians about what is actually going on here? Instead, they felt they had to come to an agreement, they had to shake hands, and now the Liberal Party owns this as well. So when this inevitably fails and there is another violent attack in our community, which there will be, that will be as much brought down on the Liberal Party as it is the Labor Party. So they're all bound to this bad legislation now.
Well, there is far too much performative politics at this time, and the Albanese government is the absolute past master of performative politics. And I do think that this legislation does look like it's performative legislation as opposed to effective legislation, because at no time has the government been specific about exactly what it is supposed to stop, other than saying it's supposed to stop hate preaching, hate groups and race hatred. Well, exactly what groups, exactly what preaching, and exactly which hatred, they've never been able to tell us. And putting all this in the hands of judges, I fear, is deeply unwise, because the judges are unelected and unaccountable. And if the elected and accountable politicians want to give a clear signal to the judiciary, I don't think they've done it with this.
Well, they've done the opposite by having this broad language around psychological harm, which can be interpreted to mean absolutely anything. And one point I'll make as an example is if these laws were in place at the time of the Voice to Parliament referendum, the No campaign could have been banned under the guise that it was causing psychological damage to the Australian community. And nobody should be deceived into thinking that won't. Just look at the UK and look at what's happening there. That is similar things are going to happen in this country under this government, especially when we have an opposition that's polling in the low 20s and has almost no standing in the community.
Well, Dan, as I said, I would like to think that well-intentioned legislators would have done something that corresponded with what they said they were doing, and what they said they were going to do over the weekend sounded more sensible than what they seem to have done today. But let's get the sophisticated, considered legal analysis and see what it tells us. But as I said, I would be very surprised, given the reluctance of government, the reluctance of lawyers, the reluctance of courts and police commissioners to crack down on what was obviously incitement to violence before. I would be very surprised if these laws are going to make much difference.
They won't, because isn't that because a lot of these agencies are compromised? I mean, they're sort of woke DEI hires talking about climate change. They're too scared to actually deal with the issue. This is what's happened in the UK. Everybody knows the problem, but everyone's too scared to talk about it because you lose your job, you go to jail, you get hauled before all these kind of commissions. I just think that these agencies are not going to be able to be effective in an era of woke politics where they've been compromised. That's my fear.
Well, I think you're right to have that fear, Dan, and let's wait and see what the more considered analysis over the next few days tells us. I would like to think that we have taken effective action to crack down on Jew hatred, but given that it's the culture that is responsible, much more than the law, I doubt very much that this is going to change the culture.
Hi, thanks for watching.
Did you know that 3/4 of you watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe and you won't miss any of the action. While you're at it, head to ipa.org.au, follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now back to the chat.
Royal Commission, I don't think we need one. I think it's a cop-out because we already know what the problem is. You know, it was someone who murdered 15 Jewish Australians on the basis of their religious beliefs. It wasn't guns. It wasn't hate speech. Do we need to go through this? I mean, isn't this sort of a big dodge from being able to talk around the problem? I accept that maybe it'll throw up some interesting things, but when Josh Frydenberg was calling for it, my heart sank because I know where this is going, which is that Labor every single day of the week outplay the Liberal Party on the politics, and Albo's got his person in there to run the Royal Commission. I guarantee you London to a brick, the Royal Commission will recommend racial vilification laws. Lo and behold, the old bill will come back again. And the coalition will be wedded to it because they've called for the Royal Commission and they will need to stand by the recommendation. So I think this is a massive mistake.
Well, let's wait and see what the Royal Commission produces. But I've got to say, Dan, that I think it is a good principle to have a thorough inquiry into anything which is a really serious development, particularly a horribly adverse un-Australian development, like the murder in cold blood, the mass murder in cold blood of 15 people in this terrorist atrocity. I think it's a pity that there wasn't a thorough Royal Commission into the response to the pandemic. I think when something as gruesome as the Bondi Massacre happens, we should have a thoroughgoing Royal Commission into what mistakes might have been made in the lead up to this. Were there intelligence failures? Certainly there appears to have been a failure by government of general awareness of what was going on in dark corners of our country. So I think the principle of a Royal Commission is a good one. The problem is, have we got the right terms of reference? Have we got the best possible Royal Commissioner? We will really only know the answer when we see the result. But certainly, I think that we need to be very clear about what we are criminalising. And on the basis of what we've seen over the last few days, this is a government that wants to criminalise things in principle rather than to criminalise specific things that we can all agree we would be much better off without. Like chance death to the IDF, like chance globalise the Intifada, like hate preachers standing up and saying, kill Jews. See that Jew over there hiding behind a tree, go and kill him. Okay, there's probably some Islamic hadith where this is said, but it doesn't need to be repeated in modern Australia.
I mean, doesn't this reinforce, though, that freedom of speech and multiculturalism are incompatible? Because and basically Chris Minns said that, and he's happy to throw free speech under the bus in order to protect basically his constituents in Western Sydney.
And if we
why should we have to go through this process of hate speech laws because a small minority in the community are abusing free speech rights? Isn't the problem with those people, not with our freedom of speech rights?
Well, the point that we've made before on this in this discussion, Dan, is that if you want to see a global caliphate, if you want to see the introduction of Sharia law, if you want to see the primacy of the Communist Party, to take a different type of example, don't bother coming to Australia because that's incompatible with our way of life. It's contrary to our Anglo-Celtic culture. It's contrary to our Judeo-Christian ethos. And I think the big problem is that too many people in recent times have come to this country expecting to live in Hotel Australia as opposed to join Team Australia. And I just think that if there's one thing that we must do so much better in the aftermath of the Bondi Massacre, it is discriminate on the basis of values and insist that everyone who comes to this country has got to take seriously the words of the citizenship oath. I pledge my allegiance to Australia and its people, and this is the operative stuff, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. And plainly, there is a small minority amongst recent migrant communities who might have said it, but they didn't really mean it, and they certainly don't intend to live it. And that's wrong. It's wrong.
And of course, this is related to the polling news poll, the most recent news poll showing that the coalition is in the low 20s on the primary vote and is now lower than One Nation for the first time in polling history. So it's the first time the coalition has not been the dominant centre-right party. Now, polling is polling and it comes and goes, but this is it's almost gone under the radar given the hate speech laws, and I've been surprised that this hasn't been picked up more. But firstly, this is a seismic event. Secondly, One Nation is now taking votes from Labor as well. So Labor went down and the coalition went down. So this is now, I think it is now fair to describe this as a reform type situation where they're taking votes from both major parties. The difference obviously is Pauline Hanson is in the Senate, not the lower house, and One Nation doesn't have a local infrastructure in the way that Nigel Farage's reform does. But in terms of where they're pinching votes from, it is very much like the UK now.
Well, I certainly think that we have to take seriously an opinion poll that shows something like 47% of the population at this moment say they support anyone but the two major parties of government. Yes, we know that the primary vote share of the major parties has been declining steadily over the last generation, really, but this is really significant. The Liberal primary vote has slipped from 31% at the election last year under Peter Dutton to 21%, if this news poll is right, under Susan Lee. And it's therefore pretty hard to say that the election loss was all Peter Dutton's fault, whatever mistakes Peter Dutton might have made.
He may look back as a high watermark.
And it's also clear that both major political parties, but the Liberal Party in particular, have got to lift their game. I mean, when 47% of the Australian population tell pollsters that they would vote for anyone but the two major parties, both major parties have got to lift their game. And I think the problem, particularly for the Liberal Party, is that we haven't been a clear and strong alternative to the Labor Party, and often enough we appear to have insufficient strength of belief, insufficient strength of character, insufficient ability to create a contest, and that's got to change. It's got to change if the Liberal Party is to survive and if our democracy is to flourish, because a parliamentary democracy such as ours really does depend on strong political parties in order to form strong and cohesive governments. And if we ever were to find ourselves in the position of some of the European countries where we've got a series of unstable and weak coalitions between people who don't really share much in common, that's going to damage our governmental efficiency, and over time it's going to damage our democracy very badly.
Yeah. In terms of sort of obviously one of the reasons why One Nation is doing so well is in part because, partly it's a protest vote, but partly it's because basically Pauline Hanson is talking about things that a lot of people care about, which is migration, values, and net zero. So it's easy to see why people would gravitate towards that.
It is, but on the other hand, it's one thing to talk about the things that people care about, and plainly, both major parties at times on issues such as immigration have preferred not to talk about it at all, despite the concerns in the general community. But it is one thing to talk about it and be concerned about it. It's another thing to actually make a difference. Now, I'm told that there was a well-developed immigration policy ready for release by the coalition before the last election, but that for whatever reason wasn't released. We were told that there was an immigration policy waiting to be released before Christmas. I just hope that there is a well-developed policy that is going to be effective, that is going to be released soon and that is then going to be articulated and defended and justified in the community. Because it's not enough to say energy prices have got to come down. It's not enough to say immigration has got to come down. It's not enough to say we've got to respect the flag and we've got to get housing more affordable. You've got to have a realistic way to make all these things happen. And as we were saying earlier, government has become performative as opposed to effective. Why are people disillusioned? Because over the last decade or so, government appears to be fiddling while Rome burns. And we need government that makes a difference, that acts, that doesn't just talk. And my worry today, on so many different fronts, is that there's a lot of talking, but there's not very much effective action. And as we were saying earlier, these laws designed in some way to reduce Jew hatred, I suspect will either be ineffective or could actually have a whole lot of counterproductive effects.
Yep. Just to round out the migration discussion, and we'll talk about something that's arguably more lighthearted, but not if you're living in Greenland or Denmark. We'll talk about the Trump thing. But just to round out migration, one thing I'm asked is, okay, well, you don't like this, what would you do? My suggestion is, number one, as you say, enforce the laws that exist. Number two, you've got to purge the staff at police and security agencies that are woke DEI hires and get them focused on the task of security, not climate change and other things. Number three, dramatically cut immigration immediately. Number four, where you can, deport anybody who is a risk. And number five, significantly curtail the review rights that migrants have in relation to visa decisions, because they can be here for years and years and years while they challenge their visa situation in these various tribunals. Now, I understand there's various legal reasons why that's hard to deal with, but we've got to start by saying, you know, for example, if you don't rock up to your hearing, you're out. You get one hearing, not two, you're out. Things like this. These are 5 or 6 things that we could start to do that would make a million times more difference than these terrible laws.
Well, I think that the objectives that you've just articulated are very sound, Dan. And I certainly agree with you that we want to drastically reduce migration. But in order to drastically reduce migration, we've actually got to change the rules that have made migration so high. And the biggest single culprit is the so-called export education industry, which has brought all these people into the country ostensibly to get an education, but actually to become migrants, actually to get residency in the long run and to get work rights in the short run. So there are a whole lot of things that need to be done in order to achieve the objective. And that's why it's one thing to have, if you like, the 3-word slogan. I'm the master of the 3-word slogan, but you also have to have, and I think the Abbott government substantially did, you've also got to have, and the Abbott opposition substantially did in things like Operation Sovereign Borders, you've got to have the mechanism to deliver the outcome that the 3-word slogan encapsulates. And I think this is going to be the problem in the long run with One Nation. I think it could easily be the problem in the long run with reform in Britain. And it's something that the coalition has to be careful a trap that the coalition has to be careful to avoid.
All right, well, we'll move on. I think we'll be talking about this, unfortunately, for most of the year, sadly, because I think that another Bondi-type event is not necessarily inevitable, but this violent... My concern is we're going to end up like Europe, where sectarian violence becomes accepted. I mean, we've just seen in Melbourne today, apparently there's reports of a Jewish individual being chased around and having Nazi things done to them. I mean, this is becoming a weekly thing, and we are becoming like Europe, where there's fire bombings, this happens, that happens, and people go, well, that's the price of multiculturalism.
And anything that encourages people to bring their ancient hatreds to Australia, we should avoid. We should avoid. And plainly, we haven't avoided it. So we have got to rethink everything that we're doing that might have contributed to the mess in which we currently find ourselves, and do it so much better and differently in the future.
Okay, let's talk about Greenland and Trump's somewhat ambit bid to take over Greenland in some way, although it may not be so ambit. We never really know with Trump. Now, his sort of notional argument is it's to do with security and not wanting China and Russia to have any more influence on the area. Probably a fair enough argument at one level, but there is the point that, well, America already has the capacity to expand its military base and personnel on Greenland in the absence of needing to take further action. So that case hasn't quite been made. Trump has sort of said, well, if you had given me the Nobel Peace Prize, I wouldn't be doing this. So I don't know. I think this is also a part of his legacy. I mean, if he believes probably if he can extend the landmass of the United States, and that's something that he will be remembered for, I suspect that's a part of his considerations as well. How much of it is to do with security versus his legacy, who knows? What are your thoughts, Tony?
Well, it's not to do with security, plainly, because under existing treaties with Denmark, the United States can have all the military bases that it wants in Greenland. And there is no evidence that Russia or China are establishing military bases in Greenland or indeed exploiting the strategic mineral resources of Greenland. And I think the chances of any of that happening are zero. So it's hard to avoid the conclusion that he's simply being, I guess, the global schoolyard bully. This is the United States deciding that it wants something and picking on little Denmark because Denmark is a small country and one of the less significant members of NATO. I think it's pretty poor form. I think that America has achieved so much, including a great deal of global respect, because it really has tried to be, to use Reagan's phrase, a shining city on a hill. It really has tried to be the last best hope of mankind, and yet there's very little sense of that in the way the current administration operates. Now, as you know, Dan, I think that bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities was all to the good. I think that snatching the narco-terrorist Maduro out of Caracas was a good thing. I like the way that Trump exploited Netanyahu's attack on Hamas in Qatar to get the remaining live hostages out of Gaza. So there are good things that Trump has done, and probably only someone as brazen as him would have been prepared to do it. But I really think that this grab for Greenland is a big step too far. I mean, there's a phrase that's attributed to de Tocqueville. Like so many of these phrases, it's not sure that he ever said it, but the phrase is worth repeating. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. Well, there's not too much playing nice coming from the current White House. Now, I don't mind the White House being pretty brusque with the enemies of freedom. But as was said of Chamberlain after Munich, he was tough on his friends and weak on his enemies. And let's see where Trump ends up.
All right, well, let's leave it there for today, Tony. Thanks for your insights, and looking forward to catching up in another fortnight or so.
Me too, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.